we named it Lab Life to stand for exactly what we want to get across in this training, which is lab information for eye care professionals. So we want to bridge that gap of understanding and communication between the lab and the ECP. And we found it for ourselves, and not only ourselves as a lab, but talking to other labs. One of the biggest things that fall off is communication. And there's many things communication wise that we would like to hit on, things every order is affected by that we would like to hit on, that in our busy lives, in the busy atmosphere of the lab, and in the busy atmosphere of your office, and your offices, it's challenging to hit these absolutely critical things perfect as we possibly can. Our first training that we're doing today is on what we've seen has been one of the biggest misconceptions, one of the biggest lacks of communication between ourselves and our customers, and frankly, one of the biggest lack of communications in the industry. You can look up, decentration, lens thickness, and frame selection, and you can find resources, but you're really not going to find someone that dives deep into a discussion exactly a lab looks for when they're wanting to get the lens as thin as we possibly can. So I made just kind of a quick goal of this discussion that we want to get at when we conclude this session, and it's produce a pair of glasses with lenses that are as thin as they practically can be. And that's meaning, how to create the most cosmetically appealing eyewear while avoiding significant lens aberrations. So how that can be done is what we're going to discuss today. I know, from our perspective, many of you might be thinking, the lab has no idea what the eye care professional is dealing with. We keep that in mind, that there are struggles of your own that we do not see every day. So during each of these sessions, we're going to invite an ABOC, someone that has been in that scenario. And today we have the perfect person in Mark Clark with Modern Optical International. He's been in the lab setting. He's been on the eye care professional setting. So has a ton of vast knowledge from both sides. So he'll be that perfect mediator to gap us. And he is going to start off and lead the discussion for us. So Mark, I'll let you take it away.
All right. Thank you, Alex. I appreciate it. And this is a topic that I've always been a little bit passionate about, from managing offices in the past and managing groups of opticians. And sometimes the challenge is just having one person in the office that can grasp this and that they can monitor orders, because not everybody really grasps it. And I started out surfacing lenses. That was my beginning in optical. I had no idea what optical was, just started in a factory surfacing lenses over 20 years ago. And it really gives you a grasp on the dynamics of a lens and the geometry of a lens when you're putting it on a cylinder machine every day. So that made me really passionate about this as an optician. And so we're going to talk about causes of thickness in both plus lenses and minus lenses. And this page is just kind of a high level overview of what we're going to jump into. But, the first thing I put up there is frame. That is going to be one of the biggest factors we'll see today. Frame shape, frame size. On a plus lens, it has a lot to do with it. It has some to do with it on a minus lens as well. But center and edge thickness, and there's some differences between plus and minus lenses. The causes of thickness in these areas, especially on a plus lens, the plus lens, the center and edge thickness are going to be determined somewhat by frame choice, power, PD, all of that. On a minus lens, the center thickness is set by ANSI, and we can't get too crazy with that for the most part. And then what we're talking about in a minus lens most of the time is edge thickness. And that also is a factor of power, PD, frame size, material, lens design, all of those things. And I kind of showed this slide a little bit to Alex before we got going, but I added one thing that he doesn't know is in here. Weird magic done by the lab, and the effect that that has on lenses. Well, there is no weird magic done by the lab. So that's what you're going to find out today. There's no weird magic that the lab can do to change lenses. And we're going to see that decentration has the largest effect overall. And that decentration is a function of the patient PD and the frame PD. And the more you can get those two to align, the much better product that you're going to have. And we really want to help you visualize that. And if there's other opticians in your office, show them the videos that we have today, because there's going to be some stuff in there to really help them visualize what is happening. Because sometimes I noticed with my staff, there was one or two that just couldn't get these concepts until it was visualized for them. And then after it was visualized, they're like, oh, okay, now I get this. So as we begin the idea of decentration, I use a term a lot. It's kind of an old term, frame PD. And essentially, when I say frame PD, I mean the bridge plus the A measurement is the frame PD. So if you have a 55 eye size frame and a bridge of 16, you've got a 71 frame PD. So decentration is frame PD minus patient PD. And essentially divided by 2 is what the decentration is going to be on each lens. And the more of that you have, as we're going to see with some of these visualizations, the more it's going to affect lens thickness. And we'll keep drilling down a little deeper and a little deeper each time on this. So this example, this visualization is a PD that is narrower than the frame PD. So we have to align that optical center with their PD. And so we have to have enough blank that we can move that over, and we'll show you some visualizations of that later as well. But so we can move that over and still have some lens out there at the temple to edge. So we have to make that blank so big. And in a plus lens, that's really going to change its thickness. On a minus lens, it's just going to kind of move that thickness from one side to the other. And so you can see after that cuts out on the right side of the screen, you can see what those edge thicknesses look like after that blank is cut out. And a lot of times an optician will look at that thick plus lens on the temple side and go, what did the lab do to me? Well, it's really what the frame choice did to you, essentially. And so we'll continue to drill down on some of these things. The next concept is PD wider than the frame PD. So there you can see the eye is offset to the outside of our gold frame there. What is that going to do to that lens? Well, on a minus lens, it transfers some of that thickness of the edge thickness to the nasal side. The blank size, it doesn't matter as much in a minus lens because the center thickness is going to be the same. It's dependent on ANSI standards for that material, whatever material you've ordered. But the plus lens, it's going to vary based on how much blank we need to make this cut out. So we need to keep that optical center lined up with that pupil. And so we've got to have a bigger blank to shift that out. And this is the result of doing that. So as we talk about frame choice and frame selection in this process, we're going to talk about how well does their PD line up with the frame PD, as we've discussed. We're also going to compare square and round. Not that those are going to change the overall center thickness, but they will change the perceived edge thickness. So a round frame with the PD very centered is going to have a thin perceived edge thickness for that plus patient. A rectangular frame for, say, a minus patient is going to seem to have a thinner lens, even though it's not actually changing the center thickness. It's just changing how those edges look when it's edged out. And we have some 3D graphics that we're going to jump into. So this is a little video that I made to kind of go over and kind of help visualize what happens as we slice this lens in different directions. So the plus lens, we've all seen probably either an uncut lens or a stock lens. And if this cross in the middle of the frame is the patient's PD, we've got to put the center of that lens on that cross. And so that makes it so we have to have a blank that is so large in order to accommodate that. And you can see what the edge thickness would be on a blank about this size. We can get down to a knife edge at the temple, but at the nasal side with the decentration, we're going to have a much thicker lens. And top and bottom, in a square frame, we're going to see a lot of that thickness because we're slicing right through in that square frame. So we're seeing a lot of that thickness on the top and on the bottom in this particular frame, if this is where their PD is. But now if their PD is centered, I can shrink that blank down to just the size of the frame. We can cut down on a lot of thickness because if we don't have to decenter and the PD is lined up, shrink that down, the thickness goes down everywhere. Nasally, that thickness goes way down. Top and bottom, that thickness goes way down. So when we're able to center that lens in that frame, we can use a much smaller blank. In fact, we can use a blank that's the same as the A measurement of that frame. So this is kind of what a rectangular lens cutout looks like when there's a lot of decentration needed for a narrow PD. You can see how thick it becomes towards the nasal. As we move on, what other factors can affect this edge thickness in a plus lens, especially a plus lens, but also in a minus lens? And that's aspheric designs. And so we've kind of exaggerated this. You can't actually flip it on its side and really see this, but we've exaggerated it here so you can see how it's thinning that down. And if the black lines represent where the frame is, and the red line represents the optical center, you can see that the aspheric design is able to taper that down. You get a thinner edge thickness, you get better peripheral optics. And one thing that I learned the hard way as a young optician running an edger is don't try to decenter an aspheric lens when the doctor calls for prism, because you can't just decenter it and make prism. You throw all the optics off. But it does help with edge thickness and a better appearance and better edge-to-edge optics for that patient. Now, the other thing that affects overall the thickness of the lens is power. We all know this. We all have as kids said, hey, somebody has Coke bottle glasses. We've all said those things. So we know that power is causing this, but what is it that causes it? How does it work? Well, power is created by the difference between the front curve and the back curve of that lens. And we all somewhat know this, but that relationship is also creating in the plus lens, the center thickness, and in the minus lens, the edge thickness. And for some reason, there are opticians out there that think that we can just magically change this and have a thinner lens. But the math stays true, that we've got to create that differentiation between the front and the rear curves to create that power. So they're not just random, and they move in proportion with one another. Just to give, say, a ridiculous example, but for discussion's sake, if you needed a minus, say you needed a -6, you could put say a 1 base curve on the front, and it would have to end up having a -7 curve or a 7 curve on the back, to kind of create that. Just in general terms, there's more math involved there. There's a lot of other dynamics, but just in general, that's kind of the concept. And so when you think about that, you can see how that the flat curve on the front of the minus and the steep curve on the back creates that power differential. Can you change the front curve? Yes, but you have to change the back curve just as much, which, if you go flatter on the front, you can go maybe, you have to change in that same proportion, the same with on the plus. So they're always tied together, and you're going to continue to have this generally same center thickness on the plus, and edge thickness on the minus. So they're very much tied together. There's no secret crazy math there. And so as we go to the math itself, max thickness equals the minimum thickness plus half the diameter times the focal power. And there's all this math there, and you're going, oh, it's Wednesday afternoon, why do I have to do math? You're like, oh, this is just, who wants to do math? And that's how I feel. That's probably how you feel. It's like, oh, math, there's just and we take our CEs and all of this, and it's like, oh, more math for me to try to swallow. It's enough to know Prentice and everything else. But what do we want you to know from that formula? We want you to know that in that formula, diameter is the number one thing that will affect thickness. So it is the number one number in that equation that will affect thickness. That's diameter. The effective radius, or the diameter of that lens, the more you can decrease that. Well, how do you decrease that? You center the PD. So the biggest step you can take in order to give a thin product to your patient is to decenter that. Alex, I see your microphone is live, so if you want to jump in on this formula.
Yeah, and the one thing, when we look at effective radius of the lens, and really, you definitely hit it right on the head, is that the biggest part of this equation and the biggest part to lens thickness is the diameter. The one thing that I do want to point out, to the power of 2,
to the power of 2, yeah.
And again, we don't necessarily care about the equation. We're going to let the computers figure that out, which, the computer software at every lab in the world figures that out for us automatically. So thank goodness, no one has to worry about actually doing this equation by hand. But it is good to understand that diameter is to the power of 2. So as you increase your decentration, it is going to double your effective diameter.
Well, and my understanding, to the power of 2 is that's an exponent. So the lower the number, that's not that big of a deal. Say 2 times 2 is 4, but 4 times 4 is 16, and 5
Right.
times 5 is 25, and it just starts going haywire on us. So
Right. Yep. And you can look at, a frame that is a 52 eye size using, a massive blank. And then all of a sudden you're seeing, thickness issues that you would not normally see if possibly you selected a smaller frame. So it is a big, a big part of this discussion that we point out, that particular spot of that equation that we definitely don't want to see every day.
Yeah. Yeah. And quite often as an optician, um, I was usually the manager, sometimes the owner, wherever I worked, and I would try to pay attention to every, say, +9 or -9 that went out my door. But a lot of times it was another optician selling the order and fitting the patient, and the patient comes back inevitably and says, "These are so heavy, these are so thick, I can't wear these." And usually, as soon as I looked at them, I said, "We need to pick you a different frame." And they're like, "What? Yeah, I got to pick a different frame?" And the optician's like, "Yeah, why do we got to pick a different frame?" I'm because this one will never work. This will never look good. Let's go back and pick another frame. Well, what do I need to pick? And I'd give them parameters. I'm like, "You can pick between this and this. I don't care what color it is. I don't care what brand it is, but you got to pick between this and this in order for this to really work for you." And sometimes that's, you know, if you get in a situation a lot of times where you need a very narrow frame on a wider head, that means you need a wider trim piece out there on the temple sometimes, so that you can get that lens in where it's got to go, but the temple out where it needs to go. So there's a lot of different factors. Call your sales reps and say, "Hey, this is what I'm looking for. I need something that's got a wider trim," or something like that, in order to make this happen.
Yeah, and we've talked, Mark, when we were talking about this the last couple of weeks, I mean, there is that, trade-off to where, yes, you can choose a smaller eye size, but it might not work well for the patient. There are applications out there that are super straightforward to help with those type of things. And I'm going to name drop the Ocho app, which would be, perfect when you're in that situation and you're struggling with, does this eye size work, for my particular patient? Does this frame shape work for my particular patient? I know that I need a 50 eye size, or, whatever it may be, to get my decentration as low as possible. Pop on the Ocho app and throw that frame, on your patient digitally, and it's a super quick and easy way to do that. So there are applications out there that make this a little easier.
For sure. Yeah. And within our Ocho virtual try-on app, you could, if you decided that, for a particular patient, a 50 eye size was the best choice. There's 2,000 frames in there, and you can immediately search by 50 eye size and see every single thing that's available, by man, woman, etc. And if I was going to pull those out of my frame bags, it would take me all day, but I can do it in seconds within the app. So that's a massive help for trying to fit that hard patient, especially when they have some specific parameters they want. They've got their parameters. They want blue, they want plastic, they want whatever. And then you're, as an optician, just trying to make sure that it works for their lens thickness. One last video here, and I'm going to mute it so I can talk over it, is the difference in those curves. So let's pretend that this first one is, say, a +2, and the other one is, say, a +10. And the easiest way that we can thin, again, as we've been talking about this, thin these down. We can't change the curves. The curves are what they are to make the power. What can we do to thin this down? Well, the only way to do that is to reduce the blank diameter. And we do that by making sure that PD is centered. Then we can reduce it all the way to the diameter of the frame. So if the frame diameter is much smaller, I'll reduce the diameter of this first blank, and you'll see the thickness shrink. As I reduce the diameter, the thickness goes way down. So if we can reduce that diameter, we can impact that thickness so much. And that's why it's exponential, related to the diameter that is needed for cutout in that particular frame. So that is the most powerful way to change thickness, because we can't change these curves. They're dictated by the power, by the material, etc. The refractive index of that material that affects it a little bit, but all of those are very small in relation to decentration and getting that frame picked in a way that works very well for that patient. Alex, did you have anything that you wanted to add there?
No, I think that is good. If we do have questions from the folks that joined us live, we would be happy to take those, or have any comments from you guys that are live with us. So we'll give you a couple minutes here to respond to anything that we included in this training.
And we'll edit this down. And if there's opticians in your office that has struggled to grasp this concept, because I've always worked with some that just, their brain doesn't work the same way mine does. You know, they didn't grow up handling lenses, etc. And, you know, you may want to show them some of these visualizations before they set out with their next, you know, high prescription patient, you know, and hopefully you only have 1 or 2 high prescription patients a day, but before they set out to dispense that next pair or help them pick a frame, they'll go out there ahead of time and be able to say to that patient, hey, you know, I'm looking at your prescription here from the doc. You know, I want to make sure that you find a frame you like, but I also want to make sure you like the final product. And the more we can stay towards this constraint of size or shape, the more that we can help you get a thin, light, comfortable, aesthetically pleasing lens at the end of the day. And so, you know, that starting the sale with that expectation is so much easier than them coming back upset and saying, okay, now I have to tell you what frame you want because you don't like this thickness. So that's a much easier sale. And I know I've been in that position many times. So we'll have this live again. You'll be able to pull it up. I'm sure Alex and his team will send it out. So if you want to be able to show any of these visualizations to any of your staff, you'll be able to do that. Thanks again, Alex. I appreciate you having me on. I always enjoy talking a little optics, even on a Wednesday afternoon. So
yeah, and thank you for doing this for us. And like I said, it's good to hear from someone that's been in that position, in both positions. So it's greatly appreciated.
Yeah.
If I could jump in with a question, Mark, if I mess with the bridge on that frame, would that, like, give any more wrap? Would that also move the optical center in? And I got one more question after that.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're not going to have much effect by you're going to change the optical characteristics of that lens a little bit, and maybe change, you know, some of the characteristics of the prism in that lens. Depending on the power, you're gonna you know, make some base in or base out depending on their power when you start doing that. So I mean, I guess it definitely, if you're going to do it before you send it. So you're gonna have an effect there, and you may make it seem less noticeable, but you're not gonna have an overall like thickness effect by messing with the bridge very much.
Next question, does corridor length have any effect? The reason I ask, I know this is for you, when I think for you, I think the variable corridor length. Does that help or hurt or any effect on the lens thickness?
Yeah, and Alex, you know, feel free to jump in, but, you know, the lab is able to do, you know, vertically do prism thinning top to bottom to try to deal with some of that edge thickness that you see at the top and bottom. That's not going to really change the overall result of the thickness, because that's still a function of power. So all that's really doing is moving optical center up or down and changing top or bottom thickness. It's not really, you know, in different frame shapes, it may be more or less noticeable depending on the shape and depending on how far they move that optical center. But I'm assuming that Alex's generator is already programmed to do a certain amount of prism thinning to the max that it can on each job. Would that be correct, Alex?
Yeah, that's correct. And I know, from talking to other labs that's everybody's goal, prism thinning. We want to have those equations in place so that we don't have to think about that when we go for edging or finishing. We want it to automatically be, as thin as possible, especially in regards to prism thinning. That is for sure.
And maybe Alex, that's where some of the confusion sometimes comes in thinking that the lab has some kind of magical powers that it doesn't have. Is that we know that prism thinning thins a progressive out in a sense because it's moving optical center up or down to get a better result. But that's a yoked type of prism, right? So if when we think of the thickness nasally or temporally, if you were to try to do something similar there, you would not be creating yoked prism. You would be creating full-on prism for that person, right?
Right.
So yeah. So there's no prism thinning this way. It's only this way. Otherwise, you're creating prism, which is why we have this whole discussion on decentration, because decentration is a prism discussion. If Alex doesn't decenter all your lenses, then all your patients have prism essentially. So
yeah, and that goes back to the original goal. We have a lot of customers that say, we say to our customers, hey, you did a great job on your decentration. You've selected 174. The RX is just significantly high. We might have to go towards the path of looking at some, special custom molded lens that is more on, customized special lab surfacing type of thing, which is a completely different discussion. But, our problem that we run into is we get a lot of customers that say, well, can you do what you can to make it thinner? The answer is, yeah, we can tell the computer, make this, as, 1.0, wherever it may be on the lens, but we're going to have some pretty significant lens aberrations, which was, the main goal that we set at the beginning of the training was we want, cosmetically appealing eyewear without any significant lens aberrations. So if there are labs out there that are manually themselves changing the the equations that we've showed today, there's going to be some type of aberration. And I like looking back, at the aspheric designs, aspheric lenses, and there's a lot of discussion with aspheric lenses, because what a lot of people and our customers will try to do is lower the base curve to try to lower the thickness of the lens. But as you do that, as you go away from the suggested base curve, you're getting a thicker lens, or excuse me, more lens aberrations. So, there are other alternatives, like we've shown today, aspheric lenses, where you can, bring the flattening away, and it'll bring down the thickness, bring down the actual weight of the lens. So those are things in my mind to wrap up.
Yeah, and another thing that we just real briefly that you and I discussed yesterday is anytime you can send a shape or a tracing on a high prescription, you're going to get a better result, because the computer can start surfacing based on better information of where the edge of that frame is. So it's not estimating too large. You'll get a much better result, or even send the whole order without maybe, sending it ahead of the frame, send it all together. One of those two, just on those high ones that you're worried about, and making sure they start from a tracing. If you can't send a tracing, then send the whole job. You're going to get a much better result at the end of the day if the computer can base that off of actual frame information. Because again, we see the results of that decentration are exponential. So even a little bit variance between, what the packaging says the ED is on that lens versus what it actually is on a higher prescription, it's exponential. So if you can't send a tracing, send the order with the frame. Don't have them started ahead. Just tell your patient, look, if you want a really good result, there's a way I want to do this. Might take a day or two longer, but this is how I want to do it to give you a really, really good result. So that was one thing I always did as an optician, and told people I wasn't going to do uncuts on a crazy prescription. I was going to send it to my lab. They're the good guys. We'll let them handle it.
Right. Yeah. And we, Precision and a lot of other labs have great, paths to select or to send us a tracing. It can be sent electronically with the order. You can send, actual demo lenses to us. And then also something that is kind of unique to Precision is we provide almost, I guess you could refer to it as kind of a guess shape. So we have like a shape 1 that is a square frame. We have a shape 2 that is an oval frame. It's not going to be as good as having the exact trace, but it gets you pretty close. And it's a lot better than having nothing. So there is that, aspect too that, tracings is always going to be better. If you're scratching your head, like I said earlier, if decentration is right on, if you're doing 174 and you said, man, what else can I do? These uncuts are still too thick. Always send the frame. Always send the frame to your lab, and that'll help significantly.
Awesome. Well, again, thanks, Alex. I know we have some people join right at the tail end, and I'm going to get this video edited and sent over to you. And however you want to distribute it, you can distribute it, because I think we did some really cool stuff today. Talked about some things that I think every optician really needs to know. Probably a lot of them know it already, but sometimes the visualization burns in your brain and it makes you think different when you dispense. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And yet, to customers and anybody else, reach out, ask your labs. There's, knowledgeable people that can help you with this. We are going to continue these trainings. We're looking at the 26th to be our next training, and looking at doing that on lens coatings, AR coatings, blue blocker coating. So that is what we're looking at next. So if you're interested in joining us live, that'll be on the 26th, and look for more information from us on that.
All right. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody that joined live.